What's going on, guys? Isaiah or /Putty24 here. Today, bringing you a legendary card crafting guide for Hearthstone's latest expansion, Scholomance Academy. It's been about a week now since the expansion came out, so we've had some time for the meta to settle down and stabilize. And today, I wanted to take a look at the legendary cards from the most recent set and see which ones are worth crafting. This set and the last set had 25 legendary cards. And obviously, for like 99.9% of players, it's impossible to have every single one unless you spend an absurd amount of money. But with that said, I wanted to take a look at the legendary cards from this set and bring you my top 7 cards that I think you should definitely craft. If you're having some trouble deciding which legendary should I be crafting, I think these 7 cards that I've picked for you here today are definitely safe crafts. Now, it's important to note that this could change, as we could have a balance patch really at any time. Blizzard has done a lot of balance patches, especially in the last expansion cycle. So it's important to know that this could change at any time. But Blizzard did say in a recent Q&A, I think a couple of days ago, that we wouldn't have a huge balance patch in the very immediate future. So I think even if we do get a balance patch, and given the fact that there isn't one coming for at least a few weeks, all of the legendaries on this list are safe crafts regardless. It's also important to note that I'm sort of weighting this based on the percentage of decks that these cards are in. I'm going off sort of half HS replay statistics, and then also my own personal thoughts and feelings and anecdotal experiences with these cards. So I'm sort of heavily weighting it towards more cards that are being played in a high percentage of decks, cards that have multiple applications across different archetypes, rather than just cards that are like just strong on paper individually or only can be used in like one deck. I'm sort of weighting it more towards like the free-to-play idea of what cards can I craft that I can use in multiple different decks. And so that's going to heavily lean towards obviously neutral legendary cards, but we only have 2 neutral legendaries on this list. The rest are actually dual class legendaries, and the dual class legendaries are really great since you can use them in obviously more than one class. You can use them in multiple decks. And I think if you're a free-to-play player trying to figure out what kind of legendaries you want to craft this time around, the dual-class legendaries are definitely a way you want to go. So with that said, let's jump into our first card here. We have at number 7, Jandis Bearoff, the Rogue and Mage legendary card. The 5-mana 2/1 summon 2 random 5-cost minions and then secretly pick one that dies instantly. I've had a ton of fun with this card. It was my free card from the expansion. And it's seeing play in approximately 4% of total decks. This is from bronze to gold based on HS replay stats. So 4%, not super high, but I think Jandis Bearoff is definitely going to be a card that's going to see a lot of play for at least the next year and a half. It's a super strong card in Tempo Mage, also seeing play in Highlander Mage, and in a bunch of different rogue decks like aggro rogues and more slow-oriented Galakron rogues. So multiple different decks that Jandis is in, and I think it's on a base power level sort of idea. She's very strong. I think a lot of players don't really know how to play against Jandis Bearoff, since you can sort of trick them. It's like sort of like a cat and mouse thing with picking what minion dies right away. And there's also tons of opportunities for high rolls with Jandis. You can roll a stealth minion and then just pick that to die instantly. So I think just a 5-mana summon 2 5-costs, at least in my experience, has proved to be very strong. And I think if you are a rogue or mage player, Jandis Bearoff is definitely a good pick for your next craft. Moving on here to our first legendary card of the list. Coming in at number 6 is Lorekeeper Polkelt, a 4-mana 4/5 neutral legendary that reorders your deck from the highest cost card to the lowest cost card. So Polkelt is a super interesting card. I don't think it's a card that's been solved just quite yet. It currently has a deck win rate of 47%, and that's across all decks. But if you actually go into Lorekeeper Polkelt decks and look at them, a lot of them are in like the high 50%. So I think people just haven't really figured out the exact, correct way to play this card just yet. But I think this card has insane amount of potential, definitely in decks like Combo Druid or just really OTK decks in general. Also, control and aggro decks can benefit a ton from this card. I think just in general, this is an extremely strong card. Currently seeing play in 5% of all total decks. So it's one that you're definitely going to want to maybe not craft right away, but I think at some point, Lorekeeper Polkelt will be a super strong card. This is one of the more tricky and intricate cards, so I think once people have some more time with it, they'll definitely be able to come up with some nice refined lists. So keep your eye on this one, and I still think it's definitely worth a craft. It's a neutral legendary, so it has a ton of applications, one that will definitely see play at some point in the near future. Coming at number 5, we have Ras Frost Whisper, the Mage and Shaman dual class legendary. A 5-mana 3/6 that deals 1 damage to all enemies but is improved by spell damage. I think this card is insane. It's not seeing a ton of play, only 3.5% of all total decks, but I've had a ton of experience with this card in Aggro Shaman and in Tempo Mage, and this card is also seeing play in both Highlander Shaman and Highlander Mage. I think Ras is extremely strong. He can single-handedly win you games against aggro, even when you're yourself playing an aggro deck. If you can even get just 1 spell damage on Ras, he can deal 2 damage to all enemies, and the majority of the time that's going to be basically good for like killing multiple minions. And in addition to that, he has a really strong stat line at a 3/6 for only 5 cost. So I think Ras is, although maybe not the highest win rate card just yet, I think it's on a pure power level. Since you can play him in both Mage and Shaman, he's just extremely strong, and if you get really anything around the 2 or 3 damage sort of level, anything above that is just super strong and super hard to come back from for an aggro deck. So I think Ras is a super safe craft, and I think all the cards in this top 5 are safe crafts, but Ras in particular is one that's definitely going to see a lot of play for the years to come, and one you can definitely go ahead and use your dust on if you are a Mage or Shaman player. Coming up next here at number 4, we have Lord Bearev, the father of Jandis Bearoff, I don't know. A Paladin/Warrior legendary, a 3-mana 3/2 that casts Equality on all enemy minions, and then has the death rattle to cast Whirlwind. Not all enemy minions, all minions in general, excuse me. This card is extremely strong. Similar to Ras, not seeing it play in a huge percentage of decks, only 3.4% from bronze to gold. But he does have a deck win rate of 59%. Now, I'm not sure how to interpret that. That is, like, I think the highest on this deck, or highest on this list, other than our number 1 card. But I think Lord Bearev is super, super strong. Probably stronger than Ras. It's going to be an insane card in, like, any control deck. Control Warrior especially is going to really benefit from this card. But there's also lots of Paladin applications, just since there's so many cards in Paladin that can like deal with low health minions. You know, Lord Bearev into a Consecration is even a solid play. So I think just in general, Lord Bearev costs so low that he just has to be good. Like I said, not seeing it play in a huge amount of decks, but I think being available in both Warrior and Paladin, if there's any sort of slower, you know, Highlander or just in general control decks that prop up in these 2 classes, Lord Bearev is going to be an absolute slam dunk for those archetypes. So I think if you are a Paladin or Warrior player and you enjoy playing slower decks, you throw Lord Bearev into one of your decks, you're just going to see that he has a huge impact on the game, can single-handedly clear a board for you at just 3 mana in combination with another card. But either way, I think he's super strong. One of the strongest legendaries just on an individual power level from this set, hands down. So I think he is a solid craft and a good one to add to your collection. Coming at number 3, we have our final neutral legendary from the list. We have Headmaster Kelthuzad. Similar to our last 2 cards, not seeing play in a huge percentage of decks, only 3.6%. But I think Headmaster Kelthuzad is the strongest neutral legendary from the set. I think there's no way he doesn't see play at some point or another. He's already seeing lots of play in Highlander decks, primarily Highlander Priest, and also sometimes Highlander Mage. But I think in both Priest and Warrior specifically, Headmaster Kelthuzad has a really strong chance to making the cut. He's a super strong card in those decks specifically, because even just killing 1 big minion with a Headmaster Kelthuzad in play can be just be a huge tempo swing and can be potentially game winning. But also Kelthuzad, if you do like a 5 mana AoE or something like a 4 mana Shadowward Ruin, kill your entire opponent's board with Headmaster Kelthuzad in play, and then just getting your entire enemy's board on your side of the board. Obviously, it can just be a game-winning play. And I think as time goes on and more AoE spells get printed, Kelthuzad will see even more play in a variety of different classes. I think the fact that he's neutral is just really a super safe craft, because he can be played in all 10 classes, and really any class that has any sort of control deck or Highlander deck that's more of a slower Highlander deck will definitely run Headmaster Kelthuzad. So if you're looking for one neutral legendary to craft from this set, and you enjoy some more slow or value type decks, Headmaster Kelthuzad is the card for you, and would definitely go ahead and add him to your collection. Coming in at the number 2 spot, our last 2 cards here, we have Speaker Guidra, a Shaman Druid dual class legendary, 3 mana 1/4 with Rush and Wind Fury, and has Spell Burst gain stats equal to the spell's cost. This card is seeing a ton of play in almost 9% of all decks in Standard, which is quite a fair bit, and has a deck win rate of around 57%. Primarily seeing play in Guardian Druid, the degenerate new ramp deck, but also has seen play in a ton of aggro Shaman and even slower Shaman lists. I just think in general this card is insanely strong, even hitting like a 2 or 3 cost spell at the very low end, and getting like a 3 mana 4/7 with Rush Wind Fury is just an insane amount of tempo. But even on the high end in that Guardian Druid deck, buffing this card up and then playing a huge spell right after it, you can be summoning like a 3 mana 10/13 with Rush Wind Fury. Just an insane amount of stats, and I think the Spell Burst mechanic in particular really works well with both Druid and Shaman. And so I think Speaker Guidra, if you play either Druid or Shaman, I think Speaker Guidra is a top 2 legendary from this set, along with our number 1 card that we'll get to in a second. And I think if you're playing any of these decks as both a Druid or Shaman player, Speaker Guidra is an exceptionally safe craft. And even if you don't play those decks, Speaker Guidra is for sure going to see play over the next year and a half. I don't really see it falling out of favor, even if there are some balance changes to those Druid decks or something. I think this card just is such a good amount of tempo that if really it's any sort of fast meta, this card is going to see play. So I definitely recommend you go ahead and craft that one if you haven't unpacked it yet, and play those classes and enjoy those decks. And for our final card here, of the top legendary cards to craft from the Scholomance Academy expansion, we have at number 1, High Abyss Allura. It's a 4 mana Paladin Priest dual class legendary. It's a 3/6 and it has Spell Burst. Cast a random spell from your deck and target this minion if possible. This card is seeing the highest amount of play at 13% of all standard decks, and has a roughly deck or win rate of 63%, which is by far the highest. This primarily comes from Pure Paladin, which is currently the number 1 overall win rate deck in the game. And in Pure Paladin, she is an absolute hard carry in that deck. Tons of high roll potential. The general idea is you want to have a bunch of buff cards naturally in Pure Paladin, like the new 5 mana buff spell, or the Libram of Hope, the big 9 mana Libram spell. And hitting either of those on an early turn with High Abyss Allura can be really just instantly game winning. Especially if you get that 5 mana 8/8 buff. You're basically summoning a 4 mana, 11/14. And 11/14 on turn 4 is going to be pretty hard for about 8 classes to deal with. So just tons of high roll potential, but not only in Paladin in the number 1 deck, in Priest as well. There's tons of buff cards in Priest that summons copies of minions, tons of lifesteal buffs in general. Really just hitting any buff on this minion is good. So she just already has a good stat line. Then as long as you don't hit a super low roll, she's just a solid amount of stats and a solid amount of value. So I think that High Abyss Allura, in my experience, is the number 1 legendary so far in the early days of this expansion. Obviously, she's played primarily in the number 1 deck archetype, which makes a lot of sense why she would be seeing so much play. But also not even in Paladin, but in Priest. Tons of potential in Highlander Priest. Tons of just potential in general for both of those classes. Not even in like slower decks only specifically. I think in aggro decks, like I mentioned, with so many buff spells, I think this card is definitely going to see play. I don't really think it's a card that will really be nerfed either. If anything, other cards from those archetypes will be nerfed. So I think if you are a Priest or Paladin player, High Abyss Allura is definitely a solid pick for a craft. And I think you would have no problems finding a use for this card if you are either a aggro or a control/value player. So guys, that's going to do it for today's top legendary cards to craft, a crafting guide from Scholomance Academy, Hearthstone's newest expansion. Obviously, still only been a week since the expansion came out, and we could definitely have some balance changes at some point, but I think either way, all 7 cards on this list are solid crafts, regardless of whether or not there are balance changes, and you will have no problems finding a use for them in your decks, not only from this expansion cycle, but from the next year and a half of Standard. So yeah, give them a try. Let me know what you think. And let me know what you think of this video. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Thank you guys so much for watching. And as always, I'll see you guys soon.